Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happenstance in this truth bomb riff. My name is Patrick Lovell. I'm the producer with the $71 trillion truth, and this is my 767th offering of what are part sermon, part lecture, part self help therapy to try to deconstruct the world that we live in and the madness of lies and obfuscation that's led to all things the Epstein class and the latest war for oil, in addition to all of the other elements of destruction that we're all in the midst of, including the law. Now, I've been riffing on these scenarios for 4 years. Why? Because the previous 10 years, effectively, I was producing content that was unpacking everything we're in the midst of to, quite frankly, prevent all that we're in the midst of. But I didn't get a toehold. I was part quashed. I have reason to speculate that the largest asset manager and the most powerful company in the world was responsible for that. I'll name names. BlackRock may have been at the other side of the sort of shadow levers of power that would prevent the information that I have because it directly intersects and exposes their role in all of this, which ultimately made them the largest asset manager in the world. It was a direct correlation. And more. I feel compelled, and I think I'm recording this on Thursday, March 12th. It is Thursday, March 12th, 2026. And I find myself like I have been throughout this whole time period, which is a Groundhog Day. Because everything we're in the midst of is the same story that's been going on for now several decades. And I want to use probably what is top of mind for most of you, especially those of you that like to repeat the claim Epstein, 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 Epstein. Now, for those of you who do that, because you really can't think through the situation, and what some folks have actually decried, that it's like the barking dog that finally gets the wheel. What do you do with it then? Or the tire, I should say. And those folks really don't know what they're looking at because for everyone that says release the Epstein files, we've had so much revealed in the last 2 to 3 months that it's enough to take down the entire system if we had a functioning system. It's not about releasing the Epstein files at this stage of the game. It's about taking the information that's exposed in the Epstein files that have already been released and putting them in a cohesive investigation to deconstruct all of the elements that make now what it is, which is, again, a sea of confusion and ultimately just overwhelming information and misinformation that has tens of millions of people both at their wits' end, but completely clueless to what's going on. And so, what is the point of these truth bomb riffs? Well, it's in service to get you to what's behind me, the clean New Deal. And can you think of anything more important at a moment when we have revealed that the Epstein class is a filthy perversion of the billionaire worms that have used all of their inside cohesive mechanisms of power to be above the law to do what exactly? To create sex trafficking and sexual slavery for children in the most god awful ways, which I have been privy to information that has absolutely shocked me. And I thought I kind of got it. It was way deeper, way more involved, way darker, way sinister, more sinister, and way more networked than anything I could have possibly imagined. And I've got a very large imagination considering the journey that I've been on. Now, I will say this at the outset. I've always suspected it was intelligence. I've always suspected that there is a shadow power, which the MAGAs, particularly Q, like to refer to as deep state. For those that understand technocracy, that understand systems, understand the system is just simply the military industrial technology slash um, hyper financialization under the umbrella of all things the oil paradigm. That's the world that we live in. What is my expertise? Well, as it turns out, I'm an expert in all things corruption. Is corruption just a catch all that just means people are up to bad things in the shadows? No, corruption is actually illegal. Corruption in the hands of investigators who know how to put together discovery and bring all of the elements together in a court of law, particularly, can hold whoever is in that conspiracy to account, of which there are laws that remedy the wrongdoing that either wind up with civil penalties where all of the money that was ill-gotten gains is ripped back, and then maybe the people who did certain things that required certain licenses no longer get those licenses, and they receive the death penalty or a corporate death penalty, of which actually Donald Trump and his organization did in the latest round of civil settlements by the state AG of New York, Letitia James. But then there's also criminal remedies. And for those of you who understand the court system, there's different degrees of felonies that carry different weight of what people have to serve, be they jail time or further sorts of monetary fines and so forth that extract the requisite appropriations based on the penalty. And there's a whole like universe of different remedies for different crimes. The crimes that I particularly deal with, that I have become an expert in, is all things racketeering, RICO, on a global scale. And as a producer, I never intended to become also an activist to try to deal with the problems that we're all dealing with in a political sort of, I don't know, expression. But I've been forced to because nobody else can or will. And I want to address from the Epstein files through the conundrum that we find ourselves in at the moment. And I want to first start with some of the mind boggling, gobsmacking interviews that took shape because of the Epstein Transparency Act, where obviously members of Congress, led by Ro Khanna and Massey, have brought together a bipartisan initiative that really hasn't played out that way. But all things considered, there have been some powerful interviews with powerful people, but done by people in Congress that have no intention of truly revealing what's going on, or they don't have the capacity to. And I'm mostly referring to the Republicans, who are complete idiots. In fact, I'll say that they're so bad that they made the Clintons look good and above reproach. Now, I'm not comparing the Clintons to all things, I was about to say Epstein, and that's a misnomer, but to all things Republicans. But they're just so much smarter. Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton ran circles around the people that were asking them questions. But lo and behold, there's a lot of questions that they didn't ask that were very important. And I'll cut to the chase. Bill Clinton sounded great. He sounded smart. He sounded effective. He sounded like he did when he was defending himself against all things Kenneth Starr's prosecution through all things Lewinsky Gate, when he got a blowjob underneath the Resolute desk in the Oval Office. That gives another meaning to the misnomer Oval in this case. But and it does bring to mind a little bit about who was Monica Lewinsky. I mean, I kind of know the story, but there's some questions that I have considering all of the things that seem to have come out of these Epstein scenarios. But President Clinton just was like, I didn't know anything about what Epstein was doing. I just was on his plane doing things for our humanitarian projects. And yeah, I got a massage at one of his frickin' islands and, but I didn't do anything wrong and I didn't know what he was doing. Yeah, he didn't have sexual relations with that woman, for those of you who come from that era. That's why they call him Slick Willie. And that can mean a few different things. But I handed to Clinton as I always did. Clinton's just an incredibly smart guy and very equipped in a court of law, and he knows exactly what he needs to do. But he was surrounded by incredibly, apt attorneys that just were like fantastic in context to the stupidity of the questions that were asked. Not to mention, what's her name, Lauren Hobart. Yeah, how funny is Lauren Hobart, the chick that was jacking off in the family theater that was caught on video that got reelected, who was like the guns and ammo calendar queen, that is asking questions and trying to pass, I don't know, some sort of character test to Clinton. I mean, for those of you who come from the same era, National Lampoon or Monty Python or all things Naked Gun, you understand satire. This satire is beyond comprehension because there was many questions people could have asked President Clinton that would have been a lot more precise, that would have led to a lot more significant engagement, but the opportunity was missed. And I guess the Clintons were very well aware that nobody would have an inclination to be able to put them on the spot. And I have to hand it to Hillary Clinton. Look, Hillary Clinton, I don't think had anything to do with Epstein, other than maybe some jam ups because of Howard Lutnick and fundraising and all of those stupid complications within the DNC, of which, if you know who I am, you understand I harp on that all the time. It's called revolving door. And until we actually sever the ties of the billionaire class and create an anti-oligarchy initiative politically, which is basically the Clean New Deal, and I'll get to the precepts of that in a moment. But it's all horseshit. Even though, yes, former Secretary of State and former First Lady who ran for the presidency and lost to Trump, that nobody anticipated because of all of these other crazy things that were happening with Russia, 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 which we now know is absolutely clear, regardless of what the insanity of the MAGA universe and the Fox, echo chamber of lies has been able to facilitate. But even her, I should say, sorry, screwed up the pronoun there. Even she would have been aware of certain things, and she can't be that stupid. Okay. There's no way in hell, in my mind, that both President Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton didn't know who Epstein was, literally and figuratively. I'm not suggesting they participated at all. No, I do not think they Bill, possibly, he seems like it'd be kind of par for the course, but I don't think with children, personally. I think if anything, he went to the island and danced with some really hot 20-year-olds. Okay. That's just my guess. Okay. Does that make it better if they were sexually groomed and trafficked? By the law, it's still questionable when a man who's over, I don't know, 60 at that time was probably doing what Bill had done his entire career, and hopefully they were more attractive. I shouldn't say that. Look, the bottom line is I find it very, very incredulous and straining credulity that former President Clinton had no idea who Epstein was. There's way too many corollaries in the financial system and the intelligence system and everything else. And same with Hillary Rodham Clinton. And I'll say most importantly, William Burns is a name that you should all be familiar with because I did an interview with a gentleman by the name of um, oh my goodness, his name will come to me. He's like one of the foremost experts in all things Epstein. He was the first guy on the scene, and he revealed incredible information as it regards to former Assistant Secretary of State or whatever his role was in the State Department before he became second. No, he was director of the CIA during Biden, and as it turns out, he was working with Epstein to find a job after he left the CIA, concurrent to obviously whatever his role was. Okay. He had close proximity to Hillary Rodham Clinton. There is no way in hell that she didn't know who he was. Same with Bill Clinton because the entire Democratic Party, even though we had kind of a, I don't know if we had a rift necessarily. I mean, it certainly played out that way in the press with then President Obama, who kind of overtook the Clinton machine, but it still was the Clinton machine. Okay. And what they were saying by way of any sort of relationship with Epstein was in, fundraising or funding their sort of Clinton initiative and global initiative, and they were involved with all the heavy players around the world. Okay, funding the Clinton initiative, and yes, what were they doing? They were doing AIDS vaccines and running all sorts of things that I have a feeling kind of played out in USAID because a lot of people kept saying, "Oh, that's just the front for the CIA." However, it worked out. And if you happen to see that interview with Epstein and Bannon, there was a time where Epstein was saying, "Yeah, I'm providing polio vaccinations for children in Pakistan, and the mothers of those children who receive that life-saving, I guess there were drugs based on stuff that he seeded with his capital, wouldn't really care where the money came from." That was Epstein's point to Bannon. And Bannon asked him, "Are you the devil?" And it was just such a circus of this gymnastics of semantics of how the Epstein class operates. They'll lie, steal, cheat, and deceive, lie, switch the blame, and implicate, lie, deny, switch the blame, and implicate. And, you're no wiser because everybody was in on it, including all of the major media of record, including the New York Times. All of the information that's coming out now could have been released 14 years ago, at least. I mean, this covers 4 administrations, and kudos to all of the outward facing victims of Epstein who are now, like 2 decades later, are all saying that this is manifested over 4 administrations. While the Democrats primarily want to focus on the giant failure of Pam Bondi's Department of Justice and Kash Patal's FBI. This is the bottom of the barrel. This is the worst of the worst. But it's the consequence of all of the failures that have happened over the course of literally since the late 90s. Okay. And this is all part and parcel to, again, my work that I'm going to demonstrate here shortly that leads you to what's behind me. The Clean New Deal at a moment that we're in a war for oil again, that is creating volatility that the press is now saying has never been seen before. And I just was looking at the market numbers a moment ago, and they are definitely sinking, but they went up, down, and all of these other insane things that have been going on, in addition to innocents being killed, like the 238 girls in that school that was hit by an American missile that Trump kind of blases, like, yeah, it happens in war, this, that, and the other. Meanwhile, he had bone spurs that he deferred 5 military deferments and got out of Vietnam because he was, the fortunate one. If you ever know that song back in the day, "I Ain't No Fortunate One" by CCR. And then ultimately, because he's from the upper crust and has been lying his entire life, and he's gotten away with it his whole life. He's lied, he's stolen, he's cheated, he's worked with the mob. The district attorneys in Atlantic City and New York never took him down. He was a celebrity above the law. This is what happens when you create 2 layers of law. You created an aristocracy, which is the Epstein class. And that's what we're in the midst of. And yeah, all of these files that have been released that have gotten things like the UK to prosecute, or I should say arrest, former, Prince Andrew, or, Andrew Van Batten, I think is his official title, and everything that's going to go with that, whether or not it's a show trial and there's some real accountability other than him losing his title and his lands, which for a guy like that is pretty much everything. But then there's also the former foreign minister of the United Kingdom, Mandelson, and then a whole host of characters from, it was shocking to me, Norway, mostly involved with the Norway Sovereign Wealth Fund. And then, of course, what we've seen in academia and what we've seen with some big name, well-known people, like, for example, hotel magnate Pritzker, not to be confused with, I think, his brother, who was the governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, but, the 76-year-old CEO of all things Hilton, that stepped down because he was named in the Epstein files. Okay, what was his role? What's the accountability? He's 76 years old. He's a billionaire. Same with Larry Summers, former president of Harvard University, who was Clinton's Treasury Secretary. And of course, there's another correlation. And I wouldn't be surprised if Robert Rubin had something to do with the Epstein files as well, to be honest with you, who was his predecessor. And, I mean, we're talking the highest levels of academia, highest levels of science, highest levels of technology, highest levels of military apparatus, highest levels of, quite frankly, entertainment. And the list goes on. Like the great George Carlin said, it's a big club and you and me aren't in it. Okay, I've known that a long time. I knew that long before I went on my journey. But what I did as the producer of my first offering, which was Forward 13 Waking Up the American Dream, which I'll put a link to down below in the description that you can watch for free if you're so inclined. But I swear to God, if you do, you'll see that we released this film 13 years ago. It could have been released yesterday. It deals with the entire paradigm of the oil financial military construct, military industrial complex. I should have included intelligence, although in my film I do address 9/11 in a meaningful way, which is definitely the first domino of the last 25 years, okay? Which is part and parcel to all of these types of things. So going back to Eyes Wide Shut and who knew what, when, and how, and the ill effectiveness of people who are even asking questions in Congress who don't have the capacity to do the proper investigation to get the people that they're interviewing in a situation where they can actually lead to indictments, prosecutions, convictions, accountability. That's what the United States has always been designed to do. Why? On the eve of the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution, where we had a revolution against the tyranny of King George III, who represented or was represented and emblematic of the paradigm of, at that time, the English power, which is what we've adopted. And we've adopted a long time ago. But as it relates to King George III, you had Parliament, which is basically the Epstein class, and then you had the corporate power, which was then the East India Trading Company, of which, by the way, the American Revolution kicked off with the Tea Party, obviously in Boston Harbor because of the tax on tea, and that was the East India Trading Company. Okay, that was the corporate hegemony. That was no taxation without representation, and that kicked off the American Revolution. And then what was the power behind the English crown? Well, it was the Redcoats and it was the Royal Navy. That's empire. We were in the midst of imperialism, and we were the first country in the world, and quite frankly, we were the only country in history to ever actually violently defeat the British Empire during its heyday. And really ever since. The Germans didn't do it in World War I, even though they got close, and same with World War II, unless you want to consider the aftermath of economic collapse by way of their empire basically became our empire after World War II, if you want to know the truth. But the notion of the Bill of Rights, of the Constitution, of separation of powers was to prevent tyranny. Okay? What did it was Benjamin Franklin. He said, it's a great system if you can keep it, right? And yes, I am very aware of the three-fifths statute baked in the Electoral College and all the ways that the republic, rather than democracy, can pervert the notion of power, take away the power of the people, and infuse it into the power of the oligarchs vis-a-vis the Electoral College. Yeah, it's always been manipulation from day one. Smarter people than you will run circles around you unless you understand what's going on. The only thing the founders really gave us, we, the American people, to provide a roadmap in order to form a more perfect union, which came out of that three-fifths statutes into abolitionists that led to the Civil War, that broke the bondage of slavery, only to keep Jim Crow alive. And Jim Crow alive basically created the eventually to show you the kind of a global impact, Hitler's Nuremberg laws. Really, that's where he got his inspiration from, was the Confederates in the South, which were nothing but aristocracy, right? So it's like there's been a conundrum from day one, and we have always been pushing through it. We have sacrificed great blood and treasure throughout our 250-year history. The sacrifice that took place during the Civil War, the American Revolution, the War of 1812, I could go through all of it, basically, all the way through the war for independence in Texas, and then of course everything that led to expansion, manifest destiny. I mean, it's been a battle and a struggle the whole time. And of course, I should have mentioned, of course, the genocide of North American Indians and all that went with it, right? It's been a struggle and a power play and battles the whole time, and that's the nature of humanity. But in the United States versus everywhere else, we have been always going towards the notion of liberty as well as independence, freedom, and justice, but predicated on the law. And if the law isn't equal, then the age old perversion of power exists because absolute power corrupts absolutely. We knew back in the 17th century when a group of men discover plunder, they create a legal code to authorize it and a moral code to glorify it. That was written by a philosopher in 17th century France during the French Revolution that preceded all of the Napoleon Wars, that would ultimately come from a guy named Bastiat. That's imperialism. And that's what this construct and this war for oil and this sorry, well, I'm going to say techno feudalism, borrowing a phrase from Yanis Varoufakis, but ultimately into all things the Epstein class, which is the oligarchs and this whole bullshit that we're seeing. They're above the law and they can get away with it because they're eyes wide shut and they've got a game and you're not in it, right? Wrong. Millions of us have to come behind the truth to break the shackles and the bondage of this freaking insanity of the Epstein class. And we've got to right the ship, which is what we're going to do. So I'm going to share my screen. And I just want to walk you through a couple of small things here, but that are absolutely imperative for us to all get on the same page. So, front page of the New York Times. Let's take a look at what's going on today. So, oil crisis worsens as Iran's leader vows to keep vital route closed. It's the Strait of Hormuz is where all of the stuff is playing out, and they're laying mines and yada yada yada, and it's disrupting the oil global economy and paradigm. And there's a fifth of the world's oil that comes through the Strait of Hormuz and then over into the Suez Canal, which of course involves Israel and everything that's going on with that scenario. But you see two tankers attacked and burning. Oil disruption is called the worst in history. Markets are plummeting. Right here on the lower right is really what matters. Why does oil matter so much to the global economy? I'm going to show that to you because it's just brief, and I can't.
Combination of renewables and nuclear energy. So why are we still so impacted by oil? The big challenge is that about 20% of the world's oil comes from the Persian Gulf. And right now, that supply has been all but choked off. It's this risk point that energy experts have been worried about for a very long time. Many of the points of vulnerabilities actually look really similar to what they did many decades ago. In 1973, there was an oil embargo led by Saudi Arabia that blocked the United States from accessing oil produced in those countries and sent oil prices soaring around the world. At that time, oil actually met almost half of the world's energy needs, but this pushed countries around the world to try to find alternatives. By 2024, oil falls to around 30% as other sources meet a growing share of the world's energy demand. While our mix has shifted considerably, we consume a lot more energy. Our oil consumption has actually almost doubled in that time. You can see that in 1973, the world used less than 60 million barrels per day. And that has climbed to just over 100 million barrels per day in 2024. How our energy mix shifts in response to this war will depend on how long the disruptions last and how high prices go. But it is a reminder of the additional risk associated with energy produced outside of a country's borders. The war in the Middle East is showing just how powerful a weapon oil continues to be, one that is capable of rattling the entire global economy. This is despite a shift in where the world's energy comes from. And you can see that here in this chart showing global energy supply, which includes oil, coal, natural gas, and a combination of renewables and nuclear energy. So why are we still so impacted by oil? The big challenge is that about 20% of the world's oil comes from the Persian Gulf. And right now, that supply has been all but choked off. It's this risk point that energy experts have been worried about for a very long time. Many of the points of vulnerabilities actually look really similar to what they did many decades ago. In 1973, there was an oil embargo led by.
All right, having a little bit of a technical issues there, but I wanted to revert back to this. I may as well just look further down here. I mean, it's just oil, 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 and the whole global economy is just. I mean, look at these thoroughfares for both air, travel as well as sea lanes, and yeah, there's a lot of incredibly important, you know, obviously the commodity for global commodities stems from the oil paradigm, which is what I show you in my film Forward 13, Waking Up the American Dream. I'll go ahead and get rid of this, and I'm going to just jump into just a couple of other things here. So basically, my first film, Forward 13, Waking Up the American Dream, and I'll have a link down below, but I dealt with all of these issues. And what I was asking at the time, after the collapse of the great financial crisis, which was the housing collapse in 2008, that was much larger than the housing collapse. It was a global economic collapse like we have never seen, and changed the global paradigm from this point forward, which is the whole point of what I'm trying to show you. But ultimately, what I had to set up in this film was, what is the structure of power? And what I discovered was power was controlled by the boards of major corporations that included the financial, fossil fuel, military industrial paradigm. And I did it through the lens looking back to 9/11 and what was 9/11. And 9/11 really sparked a 24-year war to keep us on fossil fuel. And it's just gotten worse and worse and worse, as I predicted long ago. And all of the worst players are getting, I mean, we're talking millions of deaths. I know that people are just out of their minds, as they should be, about what's happened in Gaza, 70,000 plus dead in the genocide that didn't have to happen, not even remotely the way it's played out, but it's played out because of everything that I've been laying out to you the whole time, which is part of this Epstein class, not to be confused with the Jews, even though there are Jews, of course, in the Epstein class, but it's a lot more robust and outside of just one group. It's the Epstein class, i.e., the billionaires that have choked the world on this fossil fuel, financial, military industrial paradigm that depends on intelligence in the shadows to manipulate all this stuff. But as we're looking through all of the Epstein scenario, and I was talking about Bill Clinton and HRC before, but more importantly, Les Wexner. The testimony that Les Wexner provided out of his own home, which says it all, was more to the point that the guys that asked questions were ridiculous, considering especially that Les Wexner's wife is an executive for one of the largest law firms in the country, specializing in mergers and acquisitions, which would require incredible detail. And Les Wexner kept claiming over and over and over that he had no idea how Epstein was getting paid, what he was getting paid for. And he played dumb, just like Clinton did, when there is no way in hell the Les Wexner's wife would not know where the money was going. And that goes yesterday, for example, this guy named, you can't make up this stuff up, I think is, Jesus Christ, his first name's Richard, i.e. Dick, but his last name is, it'll come back to me. He's the accountant for Epstein, who told investigators yesterday that he has no idea what the money went to. It's ridiculous. The accountants always know where the money goes to. That's their job. And they could have easily, put the pressure on this guy to be able to reveal more. And same with Les Wexner and Les Wexner's wife. The investigation is so stupid, it's not even funny. How do I know? Well, because when I came out of Forward 13, Waking Up the American Dream, I'd asked just enough of the right questions to continue pulling the thread that led me to The Con. And The Con is a 5-part docuseries that actually I've got 5 more episodes sitting on the shelf that I turned into a podcast called The New Untouchables, the Pecora Files, that reveal the largest criminal conspiracy and cover up in the history of the world, which is the 2008 great financial crisis that was tied directly to Epstein. Epstein, as it turns out, was kind of the tip of the iceberg and a small player, all things considered, but definitely a big player by way of the composite access he had to the world's most powerful people because they were very much involved as well. And I'll just explain a little bit what that means. But I'm not going to show you all of the trailers, which I'll include in the description down below so you can wrap your head around it. But I want you to understand that I have 767 videos that deconstruct all of the situations that we're in the midst of throughout the entire time period of the last 4 years. It's all a dog and pony show covering up exactly what I have the answers to. And just for example, in the last just week, I interviewed a woman who was in charge of Indivisible, the Salt Lake chapter, and she has done incredible work. But I intersect what I'm going to intersect with you guys, the Clean New Deal, where it's like nobody on the Democratic Party has a plan requisite to corruption. Not Bernie Sanders, not AOC, nobody, not Ro Khanna. They're just catching up to Epstein, and I swear to God, Epstein is as big as it seems, is that big compared to what I'm providing you between Forward 13, Waking Up the American Dream, and The Con, and my Truth Bomb riffs, and quite frankly, the podcast, which I'll include below as well, which are 21 episodes that lay all of this stuff out. But also, crypto is a big part of this. Yesterday, I did an interview with William K. Black, who is one of the foremost criminologists and experts in all things economics and things of grift because he's a legal expert and he's my mentor. And he's the guy that basically got 7,000 convictions back during the savings and loan crisis, which was the first chapter of this odyssey that's lasted for 4 decades. So people who can't pay attention to what happened yesterday, let alone 5 minutes ago, let alone a month ago, let alone a year ago, can't fully extrapolate and understand that this thing is the same story, except Epstein. Epstein happened in the late 90s to the early 2000s. He was suicided in 2019, and most of us know what that means. It's been a continuation of this Epstein class behind the shadows that have completely destroyed the law. Once again, how do I know? Because I've revealed the largest criminal conspiracy and cover up in the history of the world. But here's the key factor that never ended. It's just gotten worse. To give you a couple of highlights, 9/11, we knew exactly where the terrorist cells were. We knew exactly who was funding them. Would have been like that to be able to thwart what happened on 9/11? Oh, yeah. Why didn't it happen? Look at the last 25 years. What was 2008? 2008 was the flip side of 9/11. You might remember George Bush famously said, look, you don't have to worry about being drafted. You don't have to worry about yourself going to war. We've got enough people in our, civilian military. What am I trying to say? People that actually aren't, drafted. It's an all volunteer army is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. And who are those people in the military? Well, either minorities who did so for economic reasons, or mostly people that, came from white, we'll call them what are now Christofascists, okay? And they've been fighting mercenary wars with Blackwater and Eric Prince all over the world ever since. And then they came home to roost during Black Lives Matter, and then they morphed into ICE, okay? And so that's a paramilitary force for this Christo-fascist hostile takeover of which Project 2025 and all things Russell Vote, which was manifested by the Heritage Foundation and the Koch brothers and all the white supremacist billionaires, which included Miriam Adelson and Sheldon Adelson on the Zionist front, to create this thing to where we're looking at what Armageddon is really what the generals that are the last ones standing that didn't get weeded out or cold during Trump's first couple of months in office. Yeah, they're all in. And they're all in. Can you imagine what's going to happen with ICE and everything else if this war ends quickly? If they turn their attention to us after they, capture the Middle East and, the oil is in our hands or we can manipulate it the way we need to get it to the level that the Saudis and Trump and maybe Netanyahu on the technology side and however that all plays out. And I've done truth bomb riffs on that before. That's what we're all in the midst of. This is all a continuation of everything that I show you in my work and then some, but it all leads to ultimately the clean New Deal. And we don't live in a democracy, my friends. We haven't for a long time. I don't know if we ever have really, but it's worse than it ever has been. We don't function as a capitalistic system. That's the key consideration here, and I'll lay that out in a minute. We don't have free markets. The law is unequal, as we all know, and we don't have separation of powers. The bottom line is it's all a lie. Corruption rules everything. Millions are beginning to understand the threat of Project 2025. The Clean New Deal is democracy's answer. My friends, when you go to the top of this page, you can see all of the information from who we are, how this affects you, what we must do, what this is all about, all of the details through the white papers, how you can support. And we've got great swag that I'll show to you in a moment. And if you want to contact me, please do. But the most important thing is for you to wrap your mind around at this moment. And you've got to take your rage about the Epstein class and them raping and pillaging children and being above the law, starting another war on oil, manufactured consent, all of the rest of it, in the midst of Armageddon, in the midst of this billionaire hostile takeover, in the midst of the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. This is a revolution of truth and liberty and justice for all. If you believe in liberty and justice for all, in the integrity of the law, this is the only way through this. Bernie Sanders does not have a plan. AOC doesn't have a plan. The Democrats don't have a plan. I was watching Senator Joe Ossoff of Georgia on Lawrence O'Donnell last night, and he basically is acting like the whole thing is incompetence, and you have to vote for competence, and that's who I am. Okay, I agree, but that's not a remedy for corruption. And by the way, just like the Epstein files, this didn't just happen with Trump, even though Trump is up to his eyeballs. It didn't just happen with Trump being in the presidency a second time, 10 years after the fact. Okay? This is about the billionaire oligarchic class that has gotten more and more and more entrenched. And how do they operate? Eyes wide shut, Epstein class stuff that we're seeing through the Epstein files. It's insane. And I know it makes you disgusted that a filthy, perverted, racketeering presidency could loot billions while the American people are suffering, while destroying healthcare, while getting inside American, information like with our social security numbers and what's coming down the pike with the IRS, destroying healthcare and all of the rest of these things in service to enriching the Trump family, among other things. Trust me, it's not just the Trump family. It's the oligarchs. And if you look at it through the wide lens of the long lens, 9/11 to the wars on terror for the past 24 years, and I want to just offer a theory on that. The American people didn't have to fight in it themselves. So it was always over there. It was always like you can consume, you can do whatever you want, but you're not fighting the war, so it doesn't affect you. You don't see it. You don't understand that there's probably been 4 million deaths between Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, now, all theaters around Israel, Gaza, West Bank, and everything else, and now Iran, right? This has been a 25-year global war, oil more entrenched, and the domino to the whole thing was 9/11. That could have been easily prevented. And I can promise you, we were on the right path to get off of fossil fuel with new technologies, better energy paradigms, and obviously all of the different manner, shape, or form of technology through renewables that could have replaced fossil fuel and all things dirty fuel by this time. But that's what this has all been about: a war for the financial, military, industrial, intelligence Epstein class that wants to maintain the situation. And in a weird way, it's Donald Trump being a transactional Rico Pedo pig that has brought everybody out of their silos because nobody's safe after Doge. If you're a scientist that was getting your funding from some source that happened to be affiliated with Biden, all sorts of plans that were funding different think tanks and this, that, and the other. And you could be in your ivory tower and you could study all of the climate change and all of the details for the last 20 years, and suddenly you get your funding cut. What are you going to do now? And that goes for everybody in all of the sciences and all of the renewable energy. While at the same time, I just saw today that the highest temperatures in the history of the West in Los Angeles and in Phoenix have happened in this, like, the last couple of days. Okay. I, I live in a mountain town, or a mountain community that I love to ski and snowboard. I do it 3 times a week. Our winter has been horrendous. Do I have fun getting out there and being in the mountains? Oh, yeah. Do I wish it was a normal winter? The temperatures are incredible. I can tell you firsthand, this is just insane what we're in the midst of, because it's all the devils are here, right? We don't have to have a hell. All the devils are here because the people that have been strangling us, poisoning us, they're doubling and tripling down. Think back to COVID. For everybody that was, paranoid that there was some inside job and it was government conspiracy and they wanted to get us all on the vaccine and this, that, and the other. And I did the vaccine 3 times, and I don't know if they've got something in me. I doubt it. I'm certainly not worse off for having gotten the vaccines. I feel much better that I did. But I can tell you, during that time period, everything that I'm about to tell you with all the money, we just kept giving to the billionaire class. We had huge transfers of wealth during 2008 and 2019, right before COVID, okay, in ways that we've never seen before. And I guarantee you another one's on the horizon, considering all things oil wars. Why? Because we have a fiat currency that used to be tethered to gold. We changed that in 1971 with the Bretton Woods arrangement, where oil became gold. Oil is the commodity that makes up 75% of the globe's financial economic paradigm. And the way we have an exorbitant privilege in the United States as the world's reserve currency is that it's tethered to oil. And that's a big play of what's going on here, even though we saw Saudi apparently wean itself from the American dollar like a year ago and getting more and more involved with the yen, the Chinese yen. And we know that I think the largest exporter of oil to China is Iran. So I think everything that's happening at the moment right now is to kind of choke Iran, even though they seem well positioned because they have a lot of renewable energy, by the way. So they're not uber dependent on Iran, but at the same time, they're dependent enough. And, so choking off the oil supply to China has a lot to do with it. And also, he who controls the gold makes the rules. And that's kind of what I think is always been the play. And again, in addition to what I studied, which was political science and journalism, I come from Houston, Texas originally, where both my dad, who was a attorney as a in natural gas, and then in LNG, and my grandfather was a broker in oil. I've understood the oil, paradigm since the 70s, quite frankly, when I was a kid. And I've gotten more and more knowledge the whole time, particularly in my first film, Forward 13, Waking Up the American Dream, where I interviewed a guy who was in charge of Rice University, which is kind of like basically Harvard, especially as it relates to fossil fuels. And he was this former general counsel from Shell, and he ran their research department at Rice University. And he just walked us through the process of oil exploration. Investors invest for 40-year returns. So when you put up a beachhead in, let's say, East Africa or anywhere in the Middle East or anything else, it takes decades and decades and decades to get online, to get everything to market, to get the proceeds of the profits, and it's long term. And so we've been in this paradigm since the end of World War II. And I could go into all of that as well as the Balfour Declaration and the Holocaust in Israel, and I've done that in previous truth bombs. But yeah, it's all Armageddon coming to a head, right? And what is Armageddon? What is the rapture? The evil of lies coming to the fore so that it gives it an opportunity for God to insert Jesus to come back to the Holy Land when the Jews occupy the Holy Land. So to create the second coming, right? That's the whole biblical sort of scenario. The way I look at it, and this is just kind of funny how these absurdities of this, this clown show of the National Lampoon Trump three-ring circus of bullshit with his cabinet of fucking liars and incompetence, which are just insane and they're destroying us, which is the intent. Well, this guy is above the law because of the Supreme Court and the corruption, and they've destroyed everything the United States is supposed to be. But we've seen it happening for decades. The United States, for example, has the world's largest prison population. We have the world's largest military budget, more than the top 10 countries combined. What does it all mean? It means it's all based on the financial fossil fuel paradigm that's now giving us authoritarianism, which in the United States was the Confederacy. Okay? They want to be slave owners. And they don't care, I don't think, if 50% of the global population decimates or disappears. I think they got plans for that. We've seen the billionaires have these bunkers in Maui and this, that, and the other. And it's like we saw them all at Trump's inauguration. It's so transparent, not to mention what's happened in the Supreme Court. So what are we going to do, America? What are you going to do? You're going to put your faith in the midterms for a bunch of people that think as long as they're not Trump, they're going to win. Well, how does that get rid of the Epstein class that created this murderous mafiocracy that we're all in the midst of? It doesn't. We've got to have accountability. We've got to restore the rule of law. We've got to cut ties with the robber baron class. We've got to turn the table on tyranny, just exactly like the founders did. But I have no plans to put a three-fifths statute so that, people of color don't have equal rights. Okay? We're way past this, and I'm a child of the civil rights era and punk rock for all that goes. For all of you ex-gen who go back to the 70s and the 80s and everything that we were coming out of Vietnam and all the things that led to ultimately our Pearl Harbor, which was the 2008 great financial crisis. And I know millions of you went through the same shit that I did, and you still don't know what happened. And if you understood our work, you'd understand it was all giant lies in ways that you would not even believe, because I know most people didn't believe all of this shit was possible with Epstein. What I'm telling you has happened to tens of millions of people. But what do we do in the aftermath? Using the courts to do it, by the way. What do we do in the aftermath? We gave tens of trillions of dollars illegally to the Epstein class so that they could double, triple, and quadruple down, because you don't know that they're using the full faith of credit of the United States to basically destroy the full faith and credit of the United States. How's that for irony on the eve of the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution? So what are we going to do? Precepts of the Clean New Deal. For all of you who are absolutely out of your mind because of what took place, as you should, because of ICE in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C. and Chicago, and then ultimately Minneapolis and the murders of Renee Nicole Good and Alex Preddy. The first question you have to ask yourself is, what is qualified immunity? The short answer is that means the cops can shoot to kill and not be held accountable. Okay, I don't have a problem with cops shooting to kill like on January 6th against a confederacy that was trying to overthrow the United States government. But that didn't happen because they were outgunned by the return mercenaries of Blackwater and all of the things that were happening with the billionaire class, with all of these clowns that showed up to DC, of which guys like Tucker Carlson said was a giant tourist trip to Congress, and every other absurdity that took place on Fox News because of Dominion. And Dominion obviously got bought, which was a voting boost that sued and got the settlement against Fox News. And ultimately, they got bought by a big Republican. All of these billionaires are buying up everything because they're guaranteed by what I'm revealing to you. But when you have police above the law who can shoot to kill and not be held accountable, they can shoot anybody. They can throw you in a concentration camp. They can throw you in a gulag. This can be Russia in 1998 in Putin's Russia, where they have fake elections and they throw everybody who is a dissident in prison, like Alex Navalny, and then ultimately kill them. That's tyranny or corruption or the Politburo or any manifestation of authoritarianism. Okay? We've seen it throughout thousands of years of history. We're on the path to do that. And we may see martial law with our military, for the elections. So there's that. How is that able to happen? Look at the cell to the right. What is judicial immunity? The Supreme Court sold us out. They etched a sketched the United States history. They completely whitewashed the Civil War, and they enabled an insurrectionist to run for the presidency, even though it was written in the Constitution in the 14th Amendment, Section 3. But what are you going to do? The billionaires got control. That's what they wanted, alongside getting rid of Dobbs. And what are you going to do? Protest? No, you have to organize. You have to get millions of people together with the answers to erect the truth, which this is the revolution of truth, to turn the tables on this genocide of lies. Let's call it that. And all things manner of shape or form, literally and figuratively. Dante's 7 layers of hell, and the worst layer of hell at the bottom layer was corruption, political corruption, by the way, just for you people who pay attention to those sorts of things, in addition to all things, literally just evil overcoming the world. Is that enough for you with the Epstein class? SCOTUS is on the side of the evil guys. So what are we going to do about that? Okay, well, what did they do? They made this guy, Donald Trump, the protector of pedophilia and a liar who's destroying the United States, our king. And he's going to have celebrations on the anniversary of the American Revolution. Can you think of anything more perverse? Well, yeah, this fat slug, this raping children, which apparently we just found out the FBI had information that Epstein's estate paid off a victim of that to stay quiet, in addition to so many other things. So you've got a king on top of a court that is above the law, and the police can shoot to kill. What is that called? Authoritarianism. That's not democracy, where the rule of law is supreme. They just destroyed the Constitution, but they have been for now decades. And it ultimately ends up, what is the Electoral College? The Electoral College is the make-believe myth that we live in a democracy, that you can vote for an outcome when we have the 7 swing states, and then you can manipulate through old Jim Crow laws to expunge 3.5 million votes, which would have been the difference in the last election. But 13 million people sat on the sidelines while all of this happened. Democracy isn't something you watch from the sidelines. Democracy is something you have to engage in and be a full participant in, because it's a full contact sport. You like UFC? Yeah, it's UFC, okay? And people fight for control of the government to steer it in the direction of the will of the people. That's the way it was intended. And then the other problem, and I should have put it in there, but the other problem is the fourth estate. Media is dead. The truth is dead. And corporate media is a tool of this authoritarianism of the billionaire Epstein class to subterfuge and mask and confuse everything that I'm trying to tell you. That's why I'm the producer with the $71 trillion truth that in your hands can upturn this nightmare to reboot the American dream. How are we going to do it? First and foremost, and when you put it all together, you have the Rubik's Cube. We've got to create a modern day Glass-Steagall Act to separate commercial banking from investment banking, just like we had for 70 years after the Great Depression. But in this case, we've got to have a caveat because we all got fooled that you cannot allow the full faith and credit of the United States to provide tens of trillions of dollars of liquidity in an emergency to a racketeering enterprise. That's exactly what happened in 2008. And in the statutes of Federal Reserve Act 13.3, it says that you can't use exigent lending to backstop commodities trades through speculation, particularly real estate. That's exactly what happened in the 2008 great financial crisis based on lies and the same predation techniques that you might think of a young girl who didn't have a lot of means, who had a lot of dreams, might have been enticed to participate in the Epstein sex trafficking world because they were promised opportunities to go to college. And many of them actually did get, tuition and other things. All they had to do was just play ball and be, what was it, those Disney characters for the former CFO, second in command of JP Morgan's Chase, Jess Staley, among other things. And by the way, and I should put the links to my interview with David Enrich of the New York Times about all of this stuff and others. I've got all of the information and I have access to all of the people that are giving this information. And I've got more information than even the most notable people in this country. And I've got many truth bombs that deliver that, particularly for those of you who are saying things like, oh my God, we need Obama to come back and ride in on his white horse. Or the Clintons were, hands clean because of their testimony in front of the committee last week. Obama, one of his legal counsel, senior, revolved out of his White House into becoming the general counsel of Goldman Sachs, who then became basically what appeared to be best friends with Jeffrey Epstein. That's probably one of many of those huge relationships that exist. I mentioned William Burns earlier. He came out of the State Department during Biden under Hillary Clinton, and then he ended up as CIA director. Those were Democrats. And obviously, all of this information was available during Democrats. And you might ask yourself, well, why didn't they reveal this information? Well, they're really good at coming up with excuses. Mostly what they did was they got settlements. They allowed a lot of the Epstein victims to get paid off by these settlements that happened in St. Thomas because JP Morgan Chase and Leon Black and others had a pound of flesh extracted in the form of somewhere close to $500 million, I'm sure. They got distributed, the lion's share, to attorneys and the AG of St. Thomas and all that kind of stuff. I don't know what the breakdown was, but there was over 1,000 victims. So you do the math, 270 million. Let's cut it in half. Let's say it's somewhere in 115 million range divided by 1,000. I don't know. Did some people decide they'd be quiet? They don't want to say anything until, obviously Ro Khanna and Massey decided to move after Lawrence O'Donnell had Brad Edwards on and said, why don't you go to the Epstein estate to get this information? That's what kicked all of this stuff off. So going to number 2 of the precept of the Clean New Deal, like Bernie Sanders says, and this is the thing he does get right time and again, and same with AOC, we've got to end Citizens United. Citizens United is shadow money in the shadows. Ask victims of P. Diddy's freak off whether or not good things happen in the shadows. I don't think so. That's why they called it a train. That's what's happening to the American people. I used to use these metaphors like, I used to say that what's happening is like a group of guys at a fraternity that roofie and rape girls and then throw them in the trash. And then later, lie and I switch the blame and they blame the victim because the girl might have been wearing something promiscuous. And so that gave them the right to gang rape them when they're on drugs. That's what the system has been doing through Purdue Pharma and all things opioids and yada, 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 and fentanyl and all of these things economic through the great financial crisis. This has been a global war for over several decades between the Epstein class, which is the top 0.1%, that has benefited the top 10% until now, this oil volatility. And they took over our government through shadow corruption, which we made legal through the Supreme Court. Again, the Supreme Court has sold out the American Revolution. So The most important thing for all of you who are like, well, we've got to have Medicare for all. I've got my issue. We've got to have a renewable energy paradigm. We've got to have better education. We have to have better science. We have to have this, that, and the other. And really, we do, because of all things, manner, or shade. Think about this. Through all of this insanity, have we lost sight that Linda McMahon, the wife of Vince McMahon, who had predilections of having hookers defecate on his chest, she's the director of education at the Department of Education? No, seriously. And they made their billions from the World Wrestling Federation. Okay? This cabinet of fools is going to destroy the United States, and that was the plan from the beginning. And they're doing a mighty fine job doing it. And you might ask yourself, and we have probably, I don't know what the window on this is. I don't think we all do, and I think it's changing by the day. But we are the world's reserve currency. It's not an issue of money. It's an issue of having people in Congress that budget for the things that we need because they want to be a government of, by, and for the people, to create a livability that gets rid of the affordability crisis, which is all tied to the tens of trillions of dollars of theft that I'm revealing to you. We've already provided 71 trillion. That was up till 2019, okay, illegally between 2009 and 2019 to the Epstein class. That's the whole story. There's no other story you need to know. When you give a crack addict endless amounts of crack and the keys to the safe, what do you think is going to happen? This. That's what we're in the midst of. Let's call it Armageddon. So you want to be on the right side of this? You want to maybe create a resurrection of the truth? That's what I'm giving you the opportunity to do. This is a revolution of the truth. And when you have a starting point of $71 trillion, there's not much you can't accomplish. We could change the entire renewable energy paradigm and get off of oil, like I demonstrated earlier before, that's going to destroy the global economy right now. We could do that in probably no time to the tune of much less than 71 trillion. As early as 2005, it was predicted to be 4.7 trillion as the numbers I saw come out of Stanford. Yeah, is there going to be some mistakes and ramp up and you have to build the plane while you're flying it? Donald Trump, in addition to everything else that he's done, has waged a war on renewables, and they destroyed the endangerment clause where now emissions are not going to be regulated. So all of you folks that live in Los Angeles County, you're going to return to Los Angeles smog 1977. And that's going to lead to a lot of deaths, okay? Not to mention, acid rain and all of these other shit that we got past decades ago. That's on the way after the war and everything else. All of our salvation is tied to the appropriate use of budgeting, just like we did in Keynesian economics to budget correctly for World War II. Can we turn the tables just like we did on the Nazis? Can we turn the tables on the Epstein class? We can do that. It's not a question of money. It's getting a majority in Congress who understand the precepts of the Clean New Deal with this plan to ferret this thing moving forward, to take advantage of all of the insanity that we're in the midst of, to turn the tables on the carnage of corruption, to redeem the dream. That's what this is. There's never been a better time to turn the tables on what's been happening in the shadows for now decades. And I've got all of the answers. I've got all of the receipts. I've got access to everybody who's got all of these answers. And we can do this, but we just need people to run for Congress on this platform. And oh, yeah, every seat in Congress is up for change, as is half the Senate. The Democratic Party under Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and AOC do not have plans reckless of the corruption. They do not have plans with Ro Khanna because he's too bogged down in what he's got going on. And he's trying to sort things out, even though I think he's about as smart as they get in Congress, truth be told. But we need a tidal wave of truth. I would like to call it a blue wave. But again, to reiterate, President Obama's chief counsel went to Goldman Sachs to become a consultant for Jeffrey Epstein. That's one tie that we know. I can assure you, after the great financial crisis, when Obama came in on his white horse with a people's mandate to basically be FDR, to give us a new clean deal or a new deal, he put all the guys in power that created the problems that we're still dealing with. That was Obama's legacy, not the fact that he got us out of war, even though I'm glad he got rid of Osama bin Laden. And, healthcare is a huge part of it. But at the same time, it didn't get rid of the corruption. It further entrenched it because we gave, at his time, 29 trillion, well, it's 33 trillion illegally to this Epstein class that he played basically a dog and pony show when he went on 60 Minutes and told everybody that what Wall Street did wasn't illegal, it was unethical. It was a lie, and he knew it, and that was his job. I bet my freaking life on it. That was his job. Again, what's going on with Epstein right now has lasted 4 administrations. Obama didn't create this problem, but he certainly didn't end it. The time to end this is now, and money is not the problem. So, moving to the final pieces of the equation. Oh, by the way, the renewable energy paradigm is the biggest part, considering the war on oil and everything else. So, please, if you have an issue with that, join us now. Again, there's a reason we call it the Clean New Deal. We got to get rid of the pollution of corruption. How? We got to expand the SCOTUS to 13 justices and get rid of the Roberts Court. We got to play the long game, just like McConnell and all of these bastards with Heritage Foundation did. Then we got to end qualified immunity and presidential immunity and judicial immunity in the Electoral College. Institute term limits for senators and representatives, because people that are sticking around for power for decades are the problem. We do need new blood. And if you're young and you're hearing what you like, what you're hearing here, call me. Let's get you in the game. And by the way, the whole purpose of the Clean New Deal is to come out of nowhere, just like Obama did in 2007 ish, but he had the backing of Oprah Winfrey, among others. Okay. Not quite the exact same thing, although I am reaching out to Brad Pitt. If anybody knows Brad Pitt, please connect us. But the bottom line is, this is the answer to everything. And the final piece of the Clean New Deal is we got to prohibit all insider trading and from Congress. I'll give you one last example to consider. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who a lot of people are like, oh, wow, she's great now that she's getting out of MAGA, or at least out of the Trump fold and retiring because she's on the side of the Epstein victims. Yeah, but she got away with $27 million in 6 years. Okay. That's not the salary of a US representative. It was revolving door, pay to play, inside job. Yeah, and I know all about, obviously Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and all of the senior Democrats. Yeah, they're all involved with it. Guys, this is the opportunity to whitewash all this stuff and basically start with a revolution of truth. Because if you, me, and everyone you see who isn't a Nazi, who believes in dignity and decency, in responsibility and integrity and equality and opportunity and beauty and sustainability, if we merge in unity behind the Clean New Deal, it is our destiny to purge the misery of tyranny, to unleash the renaissance of possibility. Only if you become a nuclear reaction to the Big Bang of truth that I'm dropping. And for those of you who are on the religious side, what are the words at the beginning of the Bible? Let there be light. For those of you who aren't religious, that believe in cosmology and physics and the science of the universe that we know, well, it's the Big Bang. It's kind of ironic that they're both actually the same thing. But here's the reality. Light is truth. And amidst this carnage of darkness, when you become a nuclear reaction vector to the truth, Big Bang of truth that I'm dropping, what happens is we become the supernova of truth that forces the light of truth through this incredible ocean of darkness, depravity, pedophilia, and pollution and corruption. Have I made my case? Please hear me. If you want to get on board, reach out to me. If you want to make a difference, all you have to do is share. Get this to everyone you see. Because right now, everything is on the line. There is no time. The time is now. It's a paradox, but we can do this. This is our destiny. Onwards and upwards.